Doug, and it's time for some more family history, things I've learned through ancestry. I've just found that this is a better way of sharing this information than trying to sit down individually with family members and talk through on a tablet or a laptop. I'll be spending more time with the O'Bannons, and in fact, I kind of have a little follow-up to part 2, where I talked about Presley Neville O'Bannon, and so let's just jump right in. Here's my generation, myself, my wife, my 2 sisters and brother-in-law. Then we go up a generation. Here's my mom and dad, William Lee and Julia May. And then we're going through my dad's mother's family. Her maiden name was O'Bannon, Martha. And her dad, my great-grandfather, Virgil Lee, 1893 to 1979. And I've talked about this in each video. It's going to keep coming up. But according to the DNA testing I did, George W. O'Bannon does not show up in my DNA as my second great-grandfather, or 2-time great-grandfather. Ambrosia does show up as my 2-time great-grandmother. So I'm going to do a video just about that later on. Then my 3-time great-grandfather is Presley Neville O'Bannon. He is named after this 4-time great-uncle that I've been talking about, Presley Neville O'Bannon. And after I did the video about him, I learned a couple more things. And so I thought I would share those quickly. Wait, wrong button. Here we go. First of all, here is a picture of his house that he had built in Russellville, Kentucky. And it is still, obviously still standing. Okay, we have a picture of it. But it's just recently been restored, or partially restored, and open to the public. So it's kind of like a little museum there in Russellville. I think it's on Main Street. The next time I go to Kentucky, I'm going to try to stop in there. I shared some things on the YouTube channel along with that video. There's a Fox News story, and then a local news story, I think out of Bowling Green, Kentucky, about it. So anyway, much more information. He obviously did well for himself after coming back, because he, like I said before, he served in the legislature of the state of Kentucky, but then was also a senator. And then eventually he moves to Henry County. And this house, I found, it was listed on Zillow, of all things. And this is, let me move this a little bit. This house is still standing and for sale. It was part of, I think, over 200 acres or so of land. And the last price I saw listed was $2.4 million for this property. It's in Henry County, like I said, outside Pleasureville, which I thought that was kind of funny when I read the name of I didn't know there was a Pleasureville, Kentucky. And it said something about the original farm being 2,000 acres. So pretty cool thing. Obviously can't go tour that because it's a private residence. I also found there were ships named after him, Navy ships, and I found some pictures. When I was reading the history, history about Uncle Presley, I think there were a total of 3 ships named after him, and at least 2 of them were destroyed. So they keep naming ships after him, and they keep getting blown up or whatever. So that was the O'Bannon 2, and then this just says O'Bannon Destroyer. So I'm wondering if this wasn't the first one, and then the other was the second one, and then there was a 3rd ship. I just don't recall what class or whatever. So that was pretty neat to find that. If you just do a search for Wikipedia, you can find quite a bit of information on Presley. I also stated something about the sword he was presented by Hamet, and the Mameluke sword. Here's a drawing. this supposedly the sword he was given, he lost, or was lost somehow. But then the state of Virginia presented him with a sword. And the story that I read said unceremoniously. So they just kind of delivered it to him. They didn't have him, like, come to the state capitol and make a big to-do about it. And I think that sword is on display somewhere. There is a Mameluke sword like the one he was presented with, and it's in a Navy museum on the East Coast. That sword was presented to a midshipman who was in Tripoli with Presley. The other part of that story that I forgot to share is that they were actually trying to free like 300 sailors that were being held in the capital city, not in Derna, but in another city. Their plan was to take Derna and then march on the capital, which I believe is Tripoli. And that never happened because they ended up bargaining and going through diplomatic channels to solve that. It also said that he brought an Arabian horse back with him to the U.S., and that when he went to Philadelphia, they presented him with some special fancy saddle and like a silk cover, or the saddle was covered in silk, something like this. So very interesting story about Presley O'Bannon. So then my 5-time great-grandfather is Captain William O'Bannon. And I haven't done a whole lot of research. I believe he would have been Revolutionary War. I'm pretty sure that's the story on him. My plan in this video is to, and here's his grave. My plan in this video is actually to go back before him. And we're going to talk about the first O'Bannon to come to the U.S. or to come to colonies, and then go into Ireland. So this is in a private cemetery in Virginia. This picture was taken in 1986, and you can see they used some chalk to get to where you can actually read what's on the stone. Like I said, I don't have a whole lot, on William O'Bannon Sr., okay, my 5-time great-grandfather. So that'll be something I'll just have to work through and talk about later. His dad, my 6-time great-granddad, is John Foley O'Bannon. And then his father is Bryant Boru O'Bannon. And Bryant is the first O'Bannon that came to the colonies. Born in 1683 in Tipperary, Ireland, and then died in 1762 in Marshall, Fauquier County, Virginia. And I do have quite a bit on Bryant. Okay, let's kind of start with him in the colonies. And let's see here. I have his will. I think they said something about he arrived about 1702, and I cannot remember. Here we go. Here's an excellent history of the man himself. Let's see. Okay. So it says he married Margaret Johnston, okay, about 1705. Yep. And I thought I saw a date of 1702 that he showed up in Virginia. Talk about the different spellings of the name. O'Bannon, you see that a lot. Something about the middle name seems to be disputed at some points, that was added somehow to tie him possibly to this king of Ireland, King Bryant Boru of Ireland. I don't know really anything about that. Yeah. So we'll talk about this down this bottom paragraph. The O'Bannons are said to have been part of the O'Carroll clan. So we're going to talk about that when we jump into Ireland here in a minute. All right, so we spent time in Virginia in Fauquier County, and I found, first of all, here's what we're talking about. It's just west of Washington, and this is the county where Presley was born. So the O'Bannons stayed in that area. In fact, I found a news story, a recent news story, of someone named O'Bannon in Fauquier County. So those roots run pretty deep there. I found where he owned land, and here's an approximate. It talks about it being south of this town called the Plains and being along a ridge. So kind of overlooking, being up high. And I don't remember exactly. I want to say it was a couple of 100 acres to start out with that he had there. There is a corner, there's a road actually, in Fauquier County. This is an intersection of O'Bannon Road and Mount Eccentric. And you can see where it is. Here's the plains. So chances are it was in this area, okay, where that land was owned, for that road to be named that. And in fact, this picture, someone put this on Ancestry. This is not my picture. But there's a picture of the road sign, O'Bannon Mount Eccentric Road. Okay. Now, Tipperary, Ireland, right in the middle of Ireland, kind of south. Okay, here's Dublin up here, but it's right in the middle of the island. All right, where he was from. Now, I did a little more research, and I'm reading off another screen over here. There is an Irish historian, 1420, who died in 1420, who wrote this verse. And I may not get it all right because, you know, my Gaelic is not so great, or Old Irish or whatever. And it's spelled Hydechi, Hydechi, the fine district of hills, the extensive land of fair fortresses, a fruitful country which they inherit is the estate of the tribe O'Bannon. So this would have been before 1420. This person wrote that. And the person that wrote this article was just kind of assuming or throwing out the idea there that Bryant came to the colonies with money, that the O'Bannons were well connected and had means. And I would say that that's probably true. Other things I read about him, they called him High Irish, snow white hair, bright blue eyes. And if you look at his will, which I have right here, I mean, it's a pretty good list of things that he owned. In fact, including people. He was a slave owner. He had land and a plantation. Okay, so this is not something that we're happy about or proud of. But chances are, if you are a white American and your family has been here as long as some of my family has, going back to the early 1700s, this is going to be something, chances are, in your, especially if they're from the South, it's going to be in your lineage. 300 acres talks about in King George County. So he had means. Now, throwing it back to Ireland, all right, I'm just going to stay here with it, but let's do this. We'll jump over here. I do have his father's name, John O'Bannon, okay, and what I know about him is Tipperary, Ireland, Tipperary Island. That's it. But according to his years, he lived to be 90. Is that 99? Yeah. So, like I said before, the O'Bannons, man, they hung on. They were around for a while. Then his father, all I have is F. O'Bannon E. I don't know what his name was, and I had very little information on him. Okay. So going back here, though, in doing research on the O'Bannons in Ireland, they helped build and they lived at this castle. It's called Leap Castle. It's spelled Leap, all right, but it's pronounced Leap. Still standing. It is a private residence today. It was burned during the Irish Civil War in the early 20th century, so 1920s, 1921, 22. And they say chances are it was burned by the Irish Republican Army. And it is reportedly to be the most haunted castle in Ireland, and one of the most haunted places on the planet. And I'm not going to get all this right, probably, but let's see, what else do I have here? No, it's nothing about the castle. You just do a search on YouTube and you can find videos that people have taken there. In fact, I've added a couple to the O'Bannon playlist on my YouTube channel. It's been featured in Ghost Hunters. It's been featured in Ghost Adventures, if you've watched any of those shows. I tried to find the episode where they spend all the time in Leap Castle on all the streaming services and have not been able to find that particular episode. It's listed as season 3 of Ghost Hunters, episode 6. But then when I look for it on Amazon or any other place, I can't find it and stream it. I've tried to find it on YouTube. I did find Ghost Adventures where they did a Halloween special, and Leap Castle was kind of like their home base, and they did a lock-in there. So who knows? It does have a very dark, disturbing past. The O'Carrolls, the O'Bannons supposedly built the castle, and they were the O'Bannons were a clan that kind of worked for the O'Carrolls. All right, the O'Carrolls were calling the shots. They were very powerful, and chances are that when you read things about the O'Carrolls killing people, going to war, things like that, chances are the O'Bannons were their foot soldiers, a lot of them. And so, when you read about the O'Carrolls doing terrible things, it's very possible that O'Bannons were doing some of those terrible things on their behalf. So a couple of stories. One of the O'Carrolls was a priest and was leading mass in the chapel in the castle. His brother shows up in the middle of mass and murders him in front of his family. That's one thing that happens. Another thing that happens is that the O'Carrolls were had paid or had hired a group of mercenaries to do some of their bidding. When they came back, they said, "Hey, we're going to throw a celebration for you." They poisoned all of them so they wouldn't have to pay them. Another story is, and this has been documented, and I'm sure it's true, that there's a dungeon there that they discovered, like with a trap door. And they had spikes at the bottom of it and all these skeletons. Tons and tons of skeletal remains. They said that it took 3 carts to empty the dungeon to get all the bones out of it. So the O'Carrolls don't sound like a really great group of people. After the O'Carrolls, then you had a family by the name of Darby that lived there. And lots of these stories started circulating about ghosts and even a demonic presence that they labeled the elemental, Irish elemental. And so you fast forward, there's an Australian historian who bought the property and lived there. His mother was an O'Bannon. I haven't tracked all that down yet, but his name is Peter Bartlett. And he lived there in the 70s and talked about things he saw. And one of the things he claimed to have seen was this elemental. And he described it as a man from the neck down, but goat's head and black eyes and black nose and all this. That's pretty creepy stuff. Who knows? He could have been doing some good weed or something. I don't know. But There are just all these stories. So when you look up Leap Castle, Leap, on YouTube, you're going to get all these videos of people that have gone to visit it and stayed there, and they talk about strange experiences they have. I believe they've closed up the dungeon. They don't go in there anymore. They might open it for people like ghost hunters or whatever. But it's owned by the man by the name of Sean Ryan, who is a musician. He's like an Irish folk musician. And his plan is to redo the place. So it takes a lot of expense, and you can imagine something like that that's kind of a kind of historic landmark, that there are lots of rules and regulations. Here's the location of Leap Castle, and I'm just a little frustrated because I knew about this place before I went to Dublin in August of 2022, but I was only in Dublin for 3 days, and it was a business trip. It's not really all that far, okay? So if I had had more time and some personal time, man, I would have been out there to see that. So that's kind of, very quick overview type thing, what I've learned about the O'Bannons going back to Ireland. So I hope you enjoyed learning about the O'Bannons.